Welcome back to the Senate Standing Committee on National Security and Defense as we continue our examination of the Defense Policy Review. Joining us in panel 3 today are General Jonathan Vance, Chief of Defense Staff, and Lieutenant General Christine Whitecross, Commander, Military Personnel Command. It's a pleasure to welcome you both back to the committee as we explore issues related to the Defense Policy Review, UN, peace support operations, and of course, issues of importance to the women and men of our military. Before I invite you to make opening remarks on behalf of the committee, I'd like to congratulate Commander Whitecross on your recently announced promotion to head NATO's Defense College in Rome. As our most senior female officer, you make us all proud, and we know you will take on the challenges of NATO with as much passion as you brought to bear on issues under your command in Canada. At this time, I'd like to invite our Chief of Defense Staff, General Vance, to make your opening statement. We have 1 hour for this panel. Please begin. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I promise that this will be no more than 55 minutes of an opening statement. Thank you for your introduction, Mr. Chair, Senators, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for inviting me again to appear before this committee. It's a real honor to do so. As I understand it, I've been asked specifically to speak on Operation Honor, but I also know that the questions can take us in many different directions. I am happy, though, to have this opportunity to provide you a brief update on our efforts under Operation Honor. As you recall, this was my first order to the Canadian Armed Forces. Its objective is to eliminate harmful sexual behavior from within our ranks. I acknowledge that this is an ambitious goal, but I will not accept a lesser target. Joining me today, as you know, is Lieutenant General Christine Whitecross, who's supporting this operation, and I'll make the point here that all of my commanders are in the process actively supporting this operation, as are all members of the Canadian Armed Forces. And like you, I'd also like to note publicly how very proud I am of General Whitecross, as she was recently named the next Commandant of the NATO Defense College in Rome, a prestigious post, which is good news for NATO and great news for Canada. I will begin with a few short remarks, following which I'd be pleased to take any and all of your questions. Mr. Chairman, Senators, we are taking short and long-term measures under Operation Honor. In the short term, we are supporting victims more effectively and responding more decisively to incidents. And in the long term, we will understand our military culture better as it relates to harmful behavior and change it to ensure that all members are treated with the respect and dignity that is their due. More effective victim support and decisive leadership will help create an environment that encourages incident reporting and ideally works to prevent. This in turn helps to build a culture that is more supportive and more responsive to the needs of our members. Au cours de la première année de l'opération Honneur, on s'est concentré sur ces mesures immédiates. En ce qui concerne l'appui aux victimes, le Centre d'intervention sur l'inconduite sexuelle fournit à nos militaires de soutien et des conseils confidentiels. Malgré ce que disent les critiques, le Centre est indépendant de la chaîne de commandement militaire. Il se concentre sur les victimes exclusivement. Nous continuons à améliorer aussi le soutien qu'on offre. Les responsables de la chaîne de commandement ont reçu de la formation et de renseignements pour apprendre la meilleure manière de soutenir les victimes de comportements sexuels inappropriés, ainsi que les travailleurs de la santé, les aumôniers, les policiers militaires et les avocats militaires. Et ces soutiens qui encouragent les anciennes victimes à en parler aujourd'hui. Pendant les 6 premiers mois de cette année, nous avons constaté une augmentation de 22% d'incidents rapportés aux policières militaires. To repeat, we have seen a 22% increase in incidents reported to the military police over the first 6 months of this year. About half of these are old cases predating Operation Honor. This demonstrates to me that at least some of these victims now believe, perhaps for the first time, that we will hear them and take action. Every report of a sexual offense, new or not, is investigated by dedicated teams within the Canadian Forces National Investigation Services, or CFNIS. These investigators have received specialized training to deal with sexual offenses and can lay criminal charges against any member of the Canadian Armed Forces. And when an investigation determines that an offense has taken place, we are taking decisive action to deal with perpetrators. Since January, 8 individuals have been convicted of sexual misconduct-related offenses, and another 55 have been subjected to administrative action. Pour répéter en français, 8 militaires ont été déclarés coupables d'infractions relatives à l'inconduite sexuelle depuis le mois de janvier. Et 55 autres ont eu faire face à des sanctions administratives. Dans les cas les plus graves, j'ai ordonné que des personnes sont relevées de leur commandement ou je les ai retirées entièrement de nos rangs parce qu'ils ne sont plus dignes de faire partie de notre organisation. Honorable sénateur, je peux vous assurer et assurer tous les Canadiens et Canadiennes que nous prenons des mesures décisives. Maintenant, j'aimerais discuter l'objectif plus à long terme de l'opération Honneur, notamment le changement de notre culture. Par le passé, notre institution a pris du temps pour reconnaître le besoin de changer, puisqu'il y a tellement d'éléments de notre culture qui nous sont chers. Like so many of my brothers and sisters in the profession of arms, I take great pride in being a member of the Canadian Armed Forces. I consider it an honor and a privilege to serve in the uniform of our country. Our culture is what gives us the resiliency that we demonstrate today, the fortitude to have weathered the storms of world wars, Korea, UN missions, and Afghanistan. But there are also aspects of our culture that have caused and still contribute to harmful, inappropriate sexual behavior. We must identify those factors and eliminate them. We have taken the first steps in this direction. Over the summer, more than 40,000 of our members completed a StatsCan survey on harmful sexual behavior within our ranks. The results are being tallied and will be made available in late November. And as I said a few weeks ago, I expect them to be sobering. The survey results will give us the information we need to conduct a detailed analysis of our military culture, covering such areas as recruitment, training, and education, leadership and the chain of command, the influence of social media, and language, to name but 3. In conclusion, Mr. Chair, I am encouraged by the progress we have achieved to date. But incidents of harmful sexual behavior are still occurring, and this is unacceptable. So I will continue to lead Operation Honor, and the leadership of the Canadian Armed Forces, and indeed all members, will be compelled to support its execution. And we will do so until every member in uniform is treated with the respect and dignity that is their due. Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thank you for your time, and I'll be happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much, General, and I want to say we appreciate very much the update on the Operation Honor, and it's obviously you have been doing a lot of work over the last number of months in respect to that issue. I'd like to just, before we begin, just to lay the framework here in respect to the question of international deployments and the National Defense Review that we've been involved in for the last number of days. And I just have an overall question that I think we'd like to get on the record here, is because we read a lot in the newspaper, and sometimes it's accurate and sometimes it isn't. So could you walk us through what are the 3 countries in Africa that are being given serious consideration for deployment? And could you, for the committee, identify the main risks posed to Canadians in those countries? And also, can you tell us, in any deployment that would take place, what equipment or personnel needs must be met by the Canadian Armed Forces to be able to take such a deployment? And is it going to take a period of time before that equipment and personnel could be put into place? I know there's a series of questions, but I know that the committee would like to be updated.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senators, I'm grateful for the question. In fact, what I'm doing right now to support government decision-making, and ultimately I'll be in a position to provide advice to government, is to look at all of the UN missions that are ongoing around the globe, and make an assessment that really follows the following logic. One is to look at the nature of the conflict itself. So whether this is occurring in Colombia, in the Middle East where there are UN missions, or in Africa where there are UN missions, look at the nature of the conflict. Then make an assessment of what would need to be done to address the nature of the conflict. Then look at what the UN is doing under its mandate to address the nature of the conflict and determine whether or not there are any gaps or whether the UN mission is effectively pointed at the heart of the problem. And then look at what Canada could contribute to any one of those missions to make a real difference on the ground to achieve directly address the nature of the conflict or the resolution thereof, or to prevent further conflict. And it's only at that point where, and I'm not complete this study yet, it's only at that point where I'll be prepared to look at what is out there in terms of what things that Canada could do, make my assessment and offer advice as to what Canada might do, and then it's up to the Government of Canada to determine what we will do. This is a process, and you've heard the Minister speak on this repeatedly, and I'm grateful, frankly, for the wisdom of giving us the space necessary to do a full assessment right from the root of the conflict all the way through to what might be done about it. And I will put that before the Minister and ultimately for decision making as we determine where best Canada can contribute to actual progress in terms of anything that can be done as it relates to the nature of the conflict and what the UN is doing. Now, you've also asked about risks. The risks change, are different between and throughout mission areas. And therefore, as it relates to the equipment that we would bring, the training that we'll do, the numbers of forces that would be put into play, whether we play a direct role on the ground or an indirect role through capacity building, all options in terms of what the military, along with a whole of government approach may bring to actually addressing the nature of the conflict and doing some good. This is what's in play right now. When the Minister speaks of doing the assessment, this is exactly what's going on. And my staff and I are working very hard, have done reconnaissance efforts, will continue to do reconnaissance across the continent of Africa and elsewhere to understand exactly what it is we might do. And I will try and build options for government as to how it is that we might best contribute. I think the start state of the Canadian Armed Forces in terms of its expertise to provide capacity building, technical expertise, enablers, or indeed sort of troops on the ground to deal with the challenges, again, in the context of a larger whole and including multiple government department efforts, I think is very good. I think we are well poised to do the necessary military tasks in some of these in these conflict areas. I would remind you, though, and I never let pass an opportunity to remind people that in most instances, the nature of the conflict and the things that you can do about it really sit. Maybe 20% of it can be managed by the military. The other 80% speak to root causes. Speak to challenges of that the nations are dealing with, and no matter how much military force you put at it, it's unlikely to solve the root causes. That said, I am confident that UN operations and Canadian Armed Forces in those UN operations can contribute to the necessary condition setting, can contribute to establishing secure environments, protection of civilians, improvement of the performance of UN forces, a whole range of things that we can do that will contribute fully to that part that the military can do. But I must insist always to state that it takes more than just the military to solve these challenges, which largely sit in social, political, and economic space.
Senator Jackson and Senator Dejanay.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for your presentation. And before I start, I want to take this opportunity to thank you and through you to the men and women who work for you, and to say to them, thanks for the service they give. I've had first-hand experience working with our men and women in Darfur and South Sudan, and what the communities used to say that, they would come during the day or whatever, they would work, and in the evening they build orphanages. I'm very proud to say this is what our men and women in uniform do. So thank you for the work you do. And you were very in your statement today. You spoke about the challenges with sexual assault. I have followed this very carefully, and I can genuinely look you in the eye and say that you made so much progress that. You certainly have taken this issue, and I commend you for the issue. And certainly the last a year or so, you've made great progress, and that is where I am so optimistic that if you go on the field, especially with peace operations, what you have learned here, you could use that. We know that the terrible challenges the peacekeepers, what people, the civilian population have. So I'm hoping what you've learned you can help others learn as well. And with that, General Vance, I'm sure you think a lot about this when you think of peace operations, and I'd like your opinion. I am very concerned about the impunity that exists within the not here, but with the peacekeepers overseas. And I'm hoping that I will leave this thought with you. I'm hoping that you will lead the way to stop this impunity, because I've just come from a conflict zone, and one of the things the women have lost faith in peacekeeping is because they felt they get away with it. Is the word, they get away with it. Impunity. So I leave that thought with you, and the chair talked about risk. Can't think of a more risky situation than the one you had in Afghanistan with a NATO force. There's no place in Africa that was as risky as Afghanistan is. So risk exists anywhere you go. My bigger question to you is, I am asking, Chair, my bigger question to you is on strategic intelligence, knowledge that you can provide. We talk about numbers, and I see from the things that we have been provided that at the moment you probably have around 103 men and women in peace operations, approximately. What I'm asking you to, I think where Canada can add, and I'd like your input in, where Canada can add is not the numbers you provide, but the competency, the strategic planning. I've seen that happen, and I think that that's where our strength lies, and I would like your opinion on that.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Chair, through you. I think I won't necessarily address all of the points that you made, but I agree with you. And I think that in general, I agree with you that the performance of UN contingents needs to continue to improve. There are a lot of UN forces deployed, and the UN as a body and the nations that provide those forces deserve to have them operate at a very high level of competence and expertise and respect for populations. Failure to do so can simply add fuel to an already damaging situation. So I could not agree with you more. When a UN force arrives and is employed, things should improve across the board. And if they do not, then I think all of us would have issues with that. As for your comment relating to the strategic influence that we can have as a country with the unique and high-valued assets that Canadian Armed Forces can bring to bear, I agree with you. I think that it not only resides in the area of equipping or the things that are equipment-based, such as aircraft, the intelligence collection and dissemination capability, our demining, our counter-IED people, all of that also has the marriage between the platform and the people. I think the most valuable thing, the most valuable resource that Canada will put to this will be its people, Canadian Armed Forces people, or people working in whole of government that will take that view that I described earlier, where we understand the nature of the conflict, we understand what it is that needs to be done. What is it that the UN or other organs are trying to get done? Are there any gaps? Is there anything that we can help with, both in terms of the very nature of the mandate or in the execution of the mandate that exists? So I think we will bring to bear a powerful analytical skill set with our people, and then try and be as practically useful within a very focused strategic effort to make a real difference. I know there are skeptics, and I am an eternal optimist in many ways as it relates to the employment of force, but I think I'm also a realist, and I think that we have to look very practically at what it is that we can do. Look hard to put the right forces in the right place at the right time to achieve those effects. We can't solve everything, but we can do good. We can do some good, and I think I'm certainly looking at this as a long-term effort where the indications, and I've said this many times, the best use of military force in many respects is conflict prevention in the first place. And then if you can't prevent it, try and mitigate it. Try to eliminate harm as you do so. Try to seek conflict termination. Sometimes, conflict termination conditions. Sometimes that means the use of force. Sometimes a lot of force. But ultimately it has to lead to something. And so I think one of the things that the Canadian influence, I hope, will be is to try to lead to some conclusive improvement. And we will bring whatever assets to bear, keeping in mind that at the center of that are our great people. We'll bring those assets to bear in a timely way.
Colleagues, time is running on for us. We have 5 senators who have questions. I would ask that the preambles be somewhat short for the questioners, and I would ask the general, I know he can be concise. Senator Desjardins, and then Senator Kenny.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Merci au général Vance et à l'adjudant général Whitecross. Alors, comme on ne peut pas faire de préambule, je vais aller directement aux questions. Monsieur le général Vance, on a entendu plusieurs témoins cette semaine qui sont venus nous dire que les missions de paix, comme celles qu'on enverrait en Afrique, sont des opérations qui sont politiques. Ils ont même ajouté, les témoins en question, que le niveau politique et diplomatique était décisionnel. Moi, j'aimerais que vous nous expliquiez comment ça fonctionne et est-ce que cette hiérarchie peut parfois mettre en danger nos militaires qui sont, à mon avis, quant à moi, beaucoup plus formés pour évaluer les dangers.
Merci, sénateur. J'aimerais répondre en anglais, si vous voulez, parce que c'est une bonne question et je suis plus à l'aise en anglais.
Tout à fait.
Mes excuses. Senator, it's an important question. I am of the opinion that organizations like the United Nations, organizations like a number of coalitions and alliances that we belong to, that seek to deal with conflict in a way, in ways to prevent it, to ameliorate it, to reduce its impact, to mitigate the consequences of conflict, to try to seek termination conditions as peacefully as possible, and where we use force to protect ourselves or to achieve those limited military objectives that eventually lead to a peace. That is certainly the doctrine that I espouse. That, in my view, is the doctrine that most, I would argue, most Western militaries espouse. I can think of no chief of defense that I know or work with around the world that wouldn't first try to find ways to prevent the conflict, to mitigate it. The use of force should never be done just for the sake of using force. I think that's a bit of a motherhood statement, but sometimes people misconstrue what it is that a military can do. We set conditions. We set conditions for better things to happen. That's the intent. That's the ultimate objective. And so I believe that the UN is a valuable institution through which, given a correct analysis and a correct application of military forces, those forces can help lead to the other things that need to occur in the political, social, and economic space to provide real and long-term change. Sometimes it takes a great deal of time to set those conditions. Peace support operations, peacekeeping operations that seek to reduce harm, to protect people while larger political decisions and economic decisions are ongoing, those are valuable too. But they've got to be effective, and they've got to lead to something. They've got to lead to a better condition, ultimately to the very nature of the reasons why there's a problem there in the first place. So I reject the notion that this is done simply for political reasons and putting troops in harm's way into risky areas for anything other than the true merits of the value of the use of military force. I honestly believe, and I'll wrap up here, Mr. Chair, because I know that you want me to be concise. Anywhere you need to use the military as opposed to any other instrument of government, it is by definition risky. It is by definition an environment that demands more than what you could do with any other group of people. So the fact that risk exists ought not to be the main reason why you wouldn't deploy. It's a factor. We would mitigate that. Would mitigate the risk, and we're experts at doing that. But a risky mission that has great potential of success may be a mission that you want to invest in. And the military, we do risk. We're good at that if we can mitigate it. If it's unmitigatable, if it's risk out of all proportion, and at the same time there's no hope of moving forward, well then it's probably the wrong mandate. And it would very likely be a mandate that I would advise the government that it would need to do some more work with the UN before you would commit troops. So I find ourselves in an excellent position right now to ponder missions for our military that will address appropriately some of the most challenging conflicts of our age. And that's where the UN is right now.
General, I think you're going to make that 55 minutes if you carry on. So, Senator Dejanay, a quick follow-up.
Senator, thank you so much.
Well, I'll make you a general today. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you so much.
We do have a number of questions.
Thank you for your answer, General Vance. I have another question for Lieutenant General Whitecross. On parle beaucoup des avantages que les femmes peuvent apporter dans une mission de paix. Auriez-vous des exemples à nous donner des effectifs et des rôles que les femmes dans les forces armées joueront dans les missions, entre autres en Afrique?
J'aimerais le dire en anglais si je peux. Merci, Senator. Oh, perfect. So, sir, thanks for that question. I would offer that when women in uniform are deployed on any type of operation, you're getting a different perspective on the situation of the ground. It allows you to communicate in some cases with different partners on the ground that you wouldn't necessarily get if you were only a mission of men. So and I think we learned that very well in Afghanistan. And it's not just women. I would venture to say it's also anybody of different cultural backgrounds. It allows you to expand your force enabling functions, as it were, on the ground. I would also offer that in many ways we think differently in terms of impacts to perhaps maybe some of the softer things, whether it's women's issues, vulnerable populations, and it gives us an ability to provide a better option to the operational decision making on the ground, because you're getting a far more holistic or comprehensive look of the situation. I don't know, sir.
Merci beaucoup,
Je peux
Madame.
ajouter un petit mot, Mr. Chair? May I just a real... Merci. I agree wholeheartedly. In fact, UN Security Council Resolution 1325 recognizes the fact that the addition of women into and the use of a gender-based analysis framework and tool set to look at conflict is the only way to look at it in its entirety. Many of these conflicts have men in the forefront, women are behind, and of course the solution to a state or national tragedy needs to affect the whole population, not just the men. And as I said before, you can't necessarily do it with military force alone. It needs to be a holistic effect. So gender-based analysis is what we've adopted, along with many of our allies, as a way to look more holistically at the nature of the conflict. And it means that you operationalize your employment of women, you operationalize your ability to perceive and change the impact on the ground to women, vulnerable populations, and so on. And tangential to this, but not exactly part of it, would be some of the child soldier initiatives that are ongoing. So you can't go in and just use, one blunt instrument to deal with some of these challenges, and Gender-Based Analysis Plus and the role of women in the field seeks to address this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci.
Senator Kenny and then Senator Carignan.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome, General. My first question is along the lines of Senator Dagenet's first question, and it has to do with force protection and how we mitigate, or how you will mitigate risks. And I'm really looking for examples that the public will relate to, because they're going to have a say eventually in whether we should pursue these missions in the future. And I dare say that the debate that's coming up in Parliament will also touch on that question. So I think it would be very helpful if you could tell us some examples of how one goes about minimizing the risks to soldiers on peace support operations.
Thank you, Senator. Indeed, force protection is a baseline factor that we always consider no matter what operation we're going on, no matter where we are. And we tailor the force, both in terms of its composition, its training, the equipment that it has, the rules of engagement that it has, to ensure that it is well equipped to deal with the obvious threats, as well as those the changes to the threat environment that could occur. And so, specifically in mitigation, I issue the ROE to the troops. They're issued under my authority. Our troops do not operate under UN ROE. They operate under Canadian ROE. And I never relinquish Canadian command of those troops. At no time do Canadians operate outside of the full command of the Chief of the Defense Staff. Yes, they will be given tactical missions by UN commanders, but these are Canadian ROE. We have learned a lot since the days of Bosnia and Rwanda and elsewhere. We have learned a lot, and one of those is you're never out from under Canadian command or their ROE. So to that end, I'm able to determine what is the sufficient force required to mitigate, respond to, and protect our troops. And I make certain that goes in there as I deploy the force and tailor the force to go in. It is clear that sometimes the UN will not ask for the total force package that we think is necessary to go in and assure force protection. And in instances like that, we have the ability to do voluntary national contributions, or in fact, work to change the nature of that which has been requested through UN and DPKO to get the right force package on the ground, because in our opinion, it needs more force. I'll give you a specific case in point where the Dutch went into northern Mali to provide, to respond to the need to the UN, to that mission's requirement for forces in the north and the ability to prevent violence up there. And they brought in attack helicopters, patrols, snipers, special forces, and introduced the notion of intelligence gathering for the first time in that mission, happily accepted by the UN, because that was the military instrument required for the job. We're going to do the same thing. The lowest common denominator will not be just looking at what the UN is asking for. We will also put a Canadian stamp on anything that we do anywhere. We have learned the lessons of the past. We also have the ability to produce very good indicators and warnings, tactical, operational, strategic indicators and warnings in terms of potential danger to our troops. And we can provide and change the equipping on the ground, on the fly, if we need to. Finally, I would say that anywhere we go in the world, we ensure that there's national command elements in proximity to them that understand completely what is going on the ground. You know, someone in charge that may be outside the UN chain of command, but looking at Canadian interests. And if there's a problem, we will react very, very quickly to it.
The last time you were here, General, we talked about how program justice wasn't meeting expectations. Our impression now is that it's still not meeting expectations and not moving forward. Can you give the committee some advice about how we should best look at that issue to see what's causing the delay?
So I didn't...
Operation Justice, UAVs, where are they going in the armed forces? Why don't we have a program that's functioning? It's been here for a decade, and we're seeing no progress.
Well, Senator, all due respect, you may not be seeing it, but it is a project on our books, and we are in the process right now of a significant policy review that will look at all aspects of equipping the armed forces into the future. You've heard the minister speak of looking holistically at the systems that we bring to bear, and so in fact the very fact that we're doing a policy review will help us in the end prioritize and fund the program that is considered essential to achieving the policy. And so I think I leave it there. That's where Just Ask sits right now. It's inside a wider effort around the policy review.
Thank you.
Senator Carignan and then Senator Bayak.
Bienvenue. Merci. J'écoute les témoins depuis ça fait plusieurs semaines, là, dans le fond, qu'on travaille sur ce dossier-là. Et au niveau de nos forces armées, ce qu'on a entendu, ce qu'on constate, il y a un sous-investissement. On a des engagements à l'OTAN de faire une dépense de 2% de notre PIB en matière de dépenses militaires. On a de la misère à faire 1%. On doit augmenter notre présence dans l'Arctique, sur les côtes. On a de la difficulté. On a le pays qui a, dans le monde qui a le plus de côtes, puis probablement le moins nombre de patrouilles puis de bateaux au kilomètre ou au nombre de milliers de kilomètres de côtes. On entend qu'il y a des problèmes également au niveau de la réserve, de la formation de la réserve. Et de l'autre côté, et je vous ai entendu dire qu'on devait avoir une force ou un impact ou faire une différence significative. Je regarde actuellement ce qui se passe un petit peu en Afrique. La Chine est omniprésente au niveau économique. Elle va établir sa première base militaire à l'extérieur de la Chine, en campant 10 000 soldats en Afrique. Il y a déjà 100 000 casques bleus, plus de 100 000 casques bleus qui sont déployés en Afrique pour différents pays. Comment le Canada peut-il faire une force significative ou faire une différence significative en Afrique dans le cadre d'un mandat de maintien de la paix avec les moyens que l'on a, les priorités que l'on doit faire face et l'omniprésence d'autres pays qui ont des intérêts économiques stratégiques là aussi à protéger. Comment on peut faire une différence significative? Il faudrait envoyer combien de soldats pour faire une différence significative? Qu'est-ce qu'on devrait faire? Moi, je pense que c'est mission impossible. Outre symbolique politique.
Thank you. Well, Senator, quite frankly, I don't share your assessment that it's mission impossible. I think that what you've described in terms of our mission sets, in terms of where we want to get to in the north, what we're doing in the maritime space, is valuable. I'd add to that a significant presence in Europe, continuing efforts in the Asia-Pacific region, ongoing defense and security of Canadians at home across the country from coast to coast to coast, our ability to respond to counterterrorism incidents, and of course our ongoing mission in the Middle East. So there's lots that the Canadian Armed Forces is doing and is absolutely capable of doing. The nature of the defense policy review is to get a good view of all of that and make the necessary decisions by the Government of Canada to determine where it wants to go in the future. As it applies right now, the force in being right now is fully capable of doing that which has already been announced. The operations in Europe, the operations in the Middle East, the Prime Minister and the Minister have announced 400 to 600 to be involved in UN operations, which some or all may be in Africa. We have not made those decisions yet. And we have ongoing commitments inside the North, in Canada, to NORAD, and in our efforts in Asia Pacific. 400 to 600 Canadians, because of the way we train, the nature of our people, the expertise that we have, the equipment and human capital that Canada can bring to bear will make a difference. We know this already. We see it all the time. So yes, you can send large numbers from other countries around the world, and they do a good job too. But it doesn't take away from the fact that adding to the very nature of what it is that we're trying to do in terms of addressing the nature of the conflict and trying to do something good. I would take one issue with how you described my opening comment. You said, I said that we would make a significant difference. I didn't say significant. I said make a difference. You said significant. But making a difference over the long term in a place like Africa, the Middle East, or anywhere else where there's a UN operation, every bit counts. And I think that we have the ability as a nation that trains, prepares its military well, we have the ability to bring an impact all out of proportion to the size, the numbers of people that we have on the ground. And I believe that to be true, but we have to set ourselves realistic, wise missions to do. It's not just throwing Canadians at a problem. As I described previously, I'm doing a detailed analysis of what's the nature of the problem. What is it that needs to be done to address the nature of the problem? What is it that the UN thinks it's going to do? And is that enough? Is it too little? Are there gaps? Are there gaps that Canada could help with? Or does the mandate need to change completely because it's pointed at the wrong thing? And then we bring to bear, after careful analysis and advice to government, the best possible military solution that will only, as we know, address about 20% of the problem anyway. Military forces are unlikely to be the ones that solve all of it, but we can contribute to it. So I think what we will also bring to bear is the weight of the analysis of what we as a country can do. What is the best thing to get done? How can we do that? And whether there are 400, 600, or 10,000, every little bit helps. I would make a point that we have discussed and had the Chinese reach out to us in terms of helping them, collaborating with them on peace support operations. We have things that we can offer. We have international expeditionary operational experience that they do not have. So I think there are ways that a few Canadians could help that 10,000 perform better. You don't always have to be the one holding the bayonet to make certain things go well. You can be influencing more widely. And so I honestly believe it that 600 Canadians there, another 400 or so in Latvia, also on a pretty significant peace operation to deter any aggression into Europe. Canadians trying to do capacity building in the Middle East, and Canadians supporting government objectives in Asia Pacific, Canadians in uniform, all contributes to the wider effort by the Government of Canada to contribute to international peace and stability. And so 600 will count.
Senator Kerrigan, if you could be concise on your
Oui.
question, please.
Le vérificateur général nous a dit que la différence de formation et d'investissement dans la formation entre les membres de la réserve et les membres des forces pouvait être un risque, je veux dire, j'oserais pas dire significatif, hein, je ne veux pas sortir les notes sténo pour savoir qu'est-ce qu'on a dit, on n'est pas en compte interrogatoire, mais qui pouvait être un risque important de ce défaut de formation-là et de fourniture d'équipement. Pouvez-vous nous parler de qu'est-ce que vous avez fait ou qu'est-ce que vous entendez faire suite au rapport du vérificateur général pour s'assurer que ce défaut de formation-là ou d'investissement dans l'équipement n'aura pas de conséquences sur des pertes de vie dans une mission de maintien de la paix?
Merci encore. We have accepted the Auditor General's report. Most of the report indicated to the challenges of record keeping of how the reserves were trained, which pointed to perhaps a deficit in terms of how they were trained and equipped. I can assure you and everybody that is interested that we will not deploy reservists that are ill prepared for operations. We just won't. We don't do that. I think the legacy of our operations in Afghanistan, where we proudly had up to 25% of task forces deployed, we made a great and important point. And every visitor that came to Afghanistan saw that, hey, there's no difference between regular and reserve. And that's because we have a good a training regime that ensures that pre-deployment training and equipping. So if there is something that a reservist is missing in terms of a skill set, that gets topped up before they go. Now, I do acknowledge, and we will be addressing it in the Defense Policy Review, that we need to look broadly at the reserves. We need to look at the investment in the reserves. We need to make certain that the baseline capacity and equipping of the reserves in Canada meets the objectives of how it is that we would employ the reserve. And so I acknowledge that. But I assure you that it is my job, the job of the Army Commander, and ultimately the job of the Minister to make certain that we completely eliminate those risks by making certain that the people that are deployed are well prepared to deploy. And that is the legacy of the, in that case they're talking of the Army Reserve, that's the legacy that we have and that we'll continue with. And we need to look more widely then at the care after deployment with reserves to make sure that they are properly reintegrated and that their mental health is accounted for like we do, as well as we do with the regular force. So I appreciate the question because it gives me an opportunity to perhaps dispel this sense that we would simply take someone who's ill prepared and send them on operations. We don't roll that way. We don't work that way. Never have, never will.
Senator Bayak and then Senator Day.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and my heartiest congratulations to you General Whitecross and my admiration. And I want to commend you both for your work on Operation Honor as well. And that we always remember to remind ourselves and Canadians that a few bad apples shouldn't spoil the whole bunch. We have an honorable history, a world-class Canadian Armed Forces, and as I said, the actions of a few have to be addressed, but not to the detriment of everybody else. And General Vance, given your previous personal experience as part of UN peacekeeping missions, can you tell us the key lessons you learned and how you plan on avoiding the pitfalls in the future? You already addressed it in your answer to Senator Kenney pretty well. My bigger concern personally is that I believe Canada is one of the only countries in the world where the Department of National Defense is not controlling the procurement. It's done by Public Works. Is that true? And I don't think that that seems like a good idea. Has there been any consideration to bringing this back under DND to streamline the bureaucracy and the overly complex system of procurements? Canadians ask me all the time, why does every government overturn the procurement process of the one before? It costs a lot of money to renew the contracts, to get out of the contracts, to pay the interest. It seems like a lot of waste. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Chair. So on the UN question, I think we've learned a great deal about operations in general over the last couple of decades, because things have changed. The world has changed. They changed as we went into a different kind of peacekeeping in Sarajevo. They changed in the Balkans. It changed again on 9/11. The nature and character of conflict has at its root, I think, some enduring characteristics, but how it manifests itself and what we do in conflict to try and get to an improved outcome is changing, and it's changing all the time. I think the most enduring lesson learned is very much like our minister has been speaking of. You need to understand the situation. You need to assess the situation. You need to understand exactly what it is that you might get done out of that, and what would the military force that you bring to bear do as part of a wider effort. I think the advent of comprehensive approach, whole of government, 3D, that's relatively new. That means that we acknowledge that the military is not necessarily the solution, but it can lead or set conditions to a solution. It can help sometimes, and sometimes it cannot. And so understanding when to use force and when not to use force, when to use military, when not to use military, that too is part of the art and science of all of this. And so making certain that there are some outcomes that are worthy of pursuing and that have half a chance of getting done, given the mandate and given the way forces are arrayed, is an enduring lesson for me. Now, we do need to understand that intractable conflicts sometimes take time. And most of the conflicts that we're dealing with today, where UN forces are today, are long and intractable and take and use the UN presence as a matter of a stabilizing influence, an influence that helps mitigate the conflict, prevent it from getting worse, reduction to the harm that comes, while the important social, political, and economic work happens to address what's really behind all of it, the nature of the conflict itself. Okay, and as per procurement, I mean, I'm quite satisfied in my own mind that where the Canadian Armed Forces sits, what my job is to state a requirement. And I state a requirement based on I look at the policy that the government of Canada has as it relates to defense. What is it that you want us to be able to do in the armed forces? How well do you want us to do it? How long do you want us to do it? I look at all number of factors. And then I determine from that, through a number of different processes, and it's ongoing, what is it that we need to do that? Is there any deficit between what you're asking me to do and what I can do? And I think that is the appropriate place for the military to be. Now, the wider procurement effort, yeah, certainly there is. I agree with you that it does get looked at a lot. Well, it needs to be looked at a lot. It's complex business. It's stewardship of the public purse. It is trying to do the right thing and looking at horizons that can go out 40 or 50 years as you're buying major capital equipment. And so I think it's I'm quite satisfied that the process that's in place where Defense states the requirement. The actual procurement effort is a wider multi-department effort led by PSPC, but then, by the procurement department. But then Defense has a role in that. So we're not absent from the process. So as your CDS, I am able to state the requirements, and that's what I need to be able to do. Yes, there is always room for improvement. One cannot say otherwise.
We're going to go a little over time, if that's okay, General. We do have a number of other questioners. I'd like to go with Senator Day, and then it'll be Senator White.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, you can see from the wide range of questions that that this is an area generally that this committee is very concerned about and interested in. But I'd like to focus on your presentation and the harmful sexual behavior aspect while you're here and while General Whitecross is still within reach, so we can talk about this. And I'd like to thank you and commend you very much, since you've taken over as chief, to say this is a priority and this we will be dealing with. Now, part of dealing with this, in my view, is deterrence and communication. And that's why I'd like to spend a little bit of time understanding fully your points. You talked about, since January, 8 individuals have been convicted of sexual misconduct-related offenses. Are all 8 of those individuals now gone from the armed forces?
So, Senator, I'll take that one on notice. I don't know their exact disposition as of this moment. Sometimes the majority of them would be,
Yes.
Or they are incarcerated and will be, or they're going through a process. So I'll have to take that on notice in terms of the actual disposition of those 8.
You refer to, and thank you for that, another 55 have been subjected to career-impacting administrative action. And then you go on to say that some have been relieved of their duties and some have been dismissed from the armed forces. I think it's important from a communications point of view that we understand just what action is being taken, and this is being treated as a serious situation. And you refer on a number of different paragraphs in your presentation, you refer to culture and the necessity to, and you said one of your longer-term goals of Operation Honor is to change culture. Now, are you talking about culture within the military, or are you talking about Canadian culture generally? And have we done any analysis and comparative study between our Canadian Armed Forces and other armed forces, maybe within NATO or otherwise, friends that could help us in doing the study to determine whether is this a military culture that we need to change, or is this something peculiar to Canada?
Excellent question, John. Okay.
Thank you, Senator. So a range of questions there. I will take on notice, in fact, to provide you the disposition to the extent that we can, acknowledging that there are privacy issues around people who are undergoing administrative sanctions, the best possible exposure of the details
Yes.
of all they're doing.
No, I understand.
I have to agree with you from the outset, though, that part of doing an increasingly better job on Operation Honor is to get the data. We're early into it yet, but get the data, but also communicate to people that data. We have to do a better job at that, and I acknowledge that in the report, and I've taken on and asked General Whitecross and the team working on this to better and more completely expose people to the punitive efforts that have gone on. Deterrence is one part of it. This first year we focused on victim support. This year we focused on making certain that victims had a voice, focused on the chain of command to ensure that they took a victims first approach. And that is ever increasingly getting better, and I think the results bear that out. But nonetheless, I can't let up on that. Victim support first and always. Yes. But at the same time, we want to try and prevent. Culture will change through many avenues. One of them will be to ensure that people know that it's unacceptable behavior and what behavior is unacceptable. And failure to abide by those standards will result in punishment. So it's got to be clear, plain, and well communicated. We need to do a better job at that. We're undertaking that before the next 6-month report. But I couldn't agree with you more. People need to see the results. At the same time, these are also my people in the armed forces. I need to give them due process, the respect of privacy where it's warranted, and so on. I just want to make certain I answer your question completely here in terms of...
The comparative study would be helpful if we knew some of that was going on.
Right. So I think all Western armed forces that I know of and am familiar with are dealing with this in one form or another. And I think all societies, through other institutions, be they universities or other organizations, even professional sports teams, yes, are dealing with this in its different forms. Suffice to say that military leadership, the chiefs of defense that I speak with, and certainly inside Canada, the stakes are so high in an armed forces where the corrosive influence of this inside the ranks that can detract from morale, that can detract from operational focus, that can prevent people from wanting to join the armed forces. And indeed, that would mitigate badly against our ability to increase the diversity in the armed forces, because diversity is increasingly a strength in military operations. The nature of conflict, as you heard General Whitecross describe, needs a broader cross-section of people involved in it. And so bringing in more women into the armed forces, I've pledged to try to get to 1% per year over the next 10 years, to increase the percentage of women in the armed forces for the very reasons that diversity across, not just with women, but with indigenous people and visible minorities, increases our operational capability. I mean, I admit I'm doing this for perhaps operationally selfish reasons. It's not just a good thing to do. It's a good thing to do because it makes us better in conflict. Yes. And that's why we're doing it.
We're going to go with Senator White. I'm sorry, time is moving on.
I'm good, Mr. Chair. He answered my question.
He did answer your question? A short question, Senator Day.
Very, very short.
I had more answer, too.
Very short. And that is with respect to the 40,000 member survey that you just had completed, and what you're going to do with that. Part of it is to analyze the harmful sexual behavior within the ranks, but then you go on to talk about a detailed analysis of military culture again. There's the word culture again. And in that study, and you refer to a number of things that I don't have time to go into, but I would like to know whether part of that study, or otherwise, will deal with the high frequency of suicide within the military.
Well, thank you, Senator. This won't point specifically at suicides. I think that's another body of work that we're undertaking, and would be delighted to return at the chairman's request to talk specifically about the care of our people, yes, ill and injured, and suicide. I suspect there are some crossover points where someone's life has been altered as a result of sexual misconduct to the point that they're considering or acted out on suicide. But I don't have those stats, and I think there's the Stats Canada survey won't necessarily answer that for us. I can say, though, very briefly that culture is a mix of a whole bunch of different factors that make us who we are. I think, broadly speaking, our culture in the armed forces is positive. We value health and fitness. We value adherence to rules and regulations. We value those things which Canadians value, and in fact we try to represent Canada effectively in the world. We value discipline. We are an instrument that, yes, is capable of using force, but it's governed. It's managed carefully when we do so. So there's lots of parts of our culture that's good. But there is a part of our culture that perhaps in the course of doing all sorts of other good things devalues individuals in some instances, does not recognize that the nature of conflict is changing so rapidly, and the issues of diversity, being diverse, being capable of taking care of your own, will indeed, being good to one another, will transmit into better operational capability. Warriors treat each other well. They always have. They always will. You even treat an opposing side well when they put their hands up. So, I think it's deep-seated. It will take a long time, but we can certainly start to deal with behaviors.
Thank you, General. I believe Senator Kenney wanted a final question as well. If you can be concise, Senator.
General, we're assuming that you will be using CJOC to command and control the peacekeeping missions overseas. If that's the case, would it be possible for you to arrange for the committee to meet CJOC and go to Startop and get briefings out there?
Mr. Chair, I'd be delighted to extend the invitation now for the committee to come at your convenience to CJOC. I would recommend, as it's relating specifically to peace support operations, that you allow the analysis period to be done, allow government decision making, allow the initial work that would be necessary to commence the deployments and scope the deployments. But I think there would be a point in time in the future where a visit to CJOC would be valuable to see what's unfolding and how it's unfolding.
It was in the context of the report that we're preparing for the minister that's due how soon?
Oh, I see. I see. Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I'd be delighted for you to visit any part of the armed forces anytime you want. If specifically you think it would be of value to go to CJOC headquarters and get the view of the world from the operational level, I'd be delighted, and I hereby extend an invitation to you.
General, could I just, before we conclude here, could you, my initial question, I asked what 3 countries were the priority countries in Africa that were being under consideration for the purposes of possible deployment. Could you give us those 3 countries so that we understand on the record just exactly what are we seriously considering? Because we read everything in the newspaper.
Mr. Chair, I'm not prepared at this point. I'm not working with priority countries. There is no such thing as priority countries. I'm looking at Africa, broadly speaking, and where the UN missions are in Africa. I'm looking globally as to where UN missions are, and we'll do an analysis of as I described to you early on. The notion that there are priority countries or not is not right now. I am not using that. That's not governing me. I'm looking at it more holistically than that.
Okay, and just following up on that, we can accept that. What time frame are we dealing with? Are we dealing in another 60 days, or do you have a time? You must have a timeline that you're moving to try to make a decision. So can we get a better understanding of what we're dealing with as far as time?
Of when the government would make a decision on what the missions are? Is that what you're asking me? Yeah, I'm not in a position to be. That's a question best for my minister.
Okay, I didn't mean to. I'll leave it at that for you in that respect. I just have one other question, which is an immediate question that perhaps you want to speak to us about, and it's come to our attention that there's been the removal of the defense minister, the finance minister, and the resignation of the interior minister in Iraq. which is obviously causing political instability. What's effects that going to have in respect to our participation with the troops that we have there?
Some of those removals are somewhat are dated. That had occurred in the past, and we're absolutely well aware of it. I think to just put it briefly, the situation in Iraq is such that the removal of the threat of Daesh, its military capacity, which may come in the months ahead, is but one part of a wider challenge in that region. I said it today, and I'll say it again. The military can address a subset of the problems, can set conditions. We are operating right now to ensure that the clear and present danger of a military or violent overthrow of the government of Iraq and casting Iraq and the region into chaos at the hands of Daesh is not going to happen. And we've in fact reversed that. At some point, Daesh will be militarily less significant or insignificant, dismantled in Iraq. However, Iraq as a functioning, successful, unitary state moving into the future with influences and influencers all around it, challenges internally, politically, economically, and socially will also need to be addressed. My belief is that the work we're doing now militarily in Iraq is the first step in a long journey to ensure the success of that region into the future. Eliminating Daesh as an entity in Iraq and Syria doesn't solve the problem, all of the problems of Iraq and Syria. It removes something that needed to be removed to prevent further chaos. But there's lots of other work that needs to be done. And so the effect of political instability, I can't comment specifically on those ministers, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, but political stability, the rule of law, democratic principles being followed, all of that is of huge importance to the long-term success of Iraq. We prevented the short-term calamity that would have been the Islamic State in Baghdad. But there's lots more to go.
Colleagues, I would like to thank Commander Whitecross and General Vance for appearing here this afternoon. We want to thank you for obviously the work that you do on behalf of the men and women in uniform as well as the Canadian public. And Lieutenant General, again, please accept our congratulations on your appointment to NATO. We will now adjourn for 3 minutes, and we will allow the next panel to be seated.